Well, I decided a while back it's time to do some upgrades on the Land Cruiser as far as axles, suspension. Stuff that's in there has been there for 15 or more years now, so it's beat up and not working like it should anymore. It's was all kind of a compromise when I put it in anyway, so now I'm to a point where I can make things the way I actually want them to be. So to start out with, I've built this. So this is Super Duty Dana 60. It's pretty standard except for now you see it's a passenger side drop instead of a driver side drop. So I swapped sides on it. So I'm going to kind of go through how I did that. Unfortunately, I didn't film a lot of the actual tube swap on it because I hadn't decided to film anything at that point. But I've got some pictures, so I'll throw some of those in there and kind of give you a general idea of how I went through all this. This is definitely not a how-to. It's just kind of how I did it. So we're going to get started here.
So this is pretty much the point where I began to question my life choices that got me to the point where I go and buy a relatively expensive axle for myself, and the first thing I do is cut it into pieces. But I guess you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. So this is where I'm starting. This did actually make it a little easier to get some of the brackets and everything cut off of this axle since I didn't have such a tight area I was working with on the short side, but still a pain in the butt. But this is where we start from. So in order to join the axle tubes back together, I machined these sleeves. They're about a 1/4 inch thick, and we'll press into the tubes, and you kind of see there's about an 1/8 inch wide ridge in the middle that makes up for the width of the blade that I use to cut the tubes off. That'll keep things separated to where they need to be, and also allows me to kind of burn a really hot root pass down in there, make sure that that sleeve and the two pieces of tube get really well welded together. Here I've got the sleeve pressed into one of the tubes. You can kind of see on that tube where it's a little gold color as I heated it up to make it so the sleeve would slide in, and then as it cools down it forms a nice press fit onto the sleeve. Makes a good strong fit. You can also see the bevel that I've ground onto the ends of the tube, so I've got good area to be able to get some weld into. So this is the alignment jig that I made to make sure this axle comes out nice and straight. See, I've got 4 bushings on there. There's one that'll go in the very ends of each axle tube, and then there's 2 more that ride where the carrier bearings would be in the center section, and then it's all riding on a nice precision ground bar. So that'll make sure that this thing comes out nice and straight when I get it all put together. And here you can see one side put together, see the bar going through the puck there at the end of the tube and through the 2 at the carrier bearing. I kind of got just this short side set up just so that I wasn't fighting both sides at once. I figure if I can get this short side straightened out, and then I can get the long side put together and just verify everything as I make it all come together. It seemed like the easier way to go to me. I don't know if it actually was, but it did work, so I got that going for me. Now it's time to move on to welding everything up. Well, those welds didn't come out too bad. I'll probably hold that together for a minute or two. And come over and get the second pass on this side, and that part will be all done. So in order to have enough room to do the tube swap, it means you got to cut about 2 inches out of the casting. Did that on both sides so that everything matches up. Where the weld line is where the casting originally extended to. I cut the tubes at that line and then cut back the 2 inches to make up for that. So there's enough room to be able to mount link brackets and be able to get in here and get the weld done. What that also does is it cuts off several of the plug welds, like this little nub here that was left that was holding the tube into the casting. So in order to kind of make up for that, done here is I drilled down through the casting into the tube so that it dimples the tube, and then weld that up, just fill the whole thing with weld. You can see over here, these ones that I haven't welded yet. If you look in there, you can see where the tube is and where the casting is, so it's going to be welding directly down into the tube, and then you just fill that up with weld to just creating, you're not really welding the casting to the tube, but you're just creating a pin that's welded to that tube that prevents it from rotating or pulling out of the casting. Okay, now that I've got this thing all welded up, I want to look at adding a truss onto it. Not that I think it needs it for strength, but it's a convenient place for building up to mount upper link mounts, steering ram, things like that. But weirdly enough, nobody builds a truss for a passenger drop Super Duty 60. It's almost like I'm doing something that nobody does. So what I've done instead, got this kit from Barnes 4-wheel drive. I'm going to cut it up and make it fit. So we're going to chop out the center section, flip it around, weld it back in, weld it onto the housing. Let's see how this goes. So I'm going to end up cutting these pieces with these here, and then we'll do a matching cut up here, and same thing on the other side. We'll cut here just in outside the bend, and same thing on these bottom 2 pieces. The good news is here and here is about the same thickness this way, so I should be able to just take these 2 pieces, flip them, weld it back in, same with this, flip it over, weld everything back in, and it should fit on. So here's all the truss parts all cut up. I did have a bit of a miscalculation here because this angle is not the same as this angle. Everything was about 1 inch off center, so when I turned it over, about a 2-inch gap right there. But we'll fill that in, it'll be fine. So on these ones, I was able to figure that out and add the 2 inches in here when I cut them, so everything works out on those. So we'll start working on getting this stuff all lined up and welded together and see how it fits. Okay, here's pieces all welded up, ready to grind down flat, and then they'll be ready to install on the axle. Okay, so we got the welds all ground down now, got everything nice and smooth, basically like it never happened. So now try to start fitting all the pieces up and getting it tacked on there and be one step closer to done. So time to start assembling all of the truss parts onto the housing. The nice part with kits like this is you got a nice slot and tab set up for them, so it's almost impossible to screw up how it goes together. So you just slot together like that. That's just going to slot onto the housing itself like that, and that's where it goes. The next piece will come in, same thing, slots on like so. Then you take the top piece, and a little plate goes on the same way. And this last piece just kind of goes in there on its own. We'll deal with that. I did get this a little bit of warp in this top piece when it welded, so we'll kind of have to clamp that together a little bit, make it fit just right. About like that. So I'm going to get all of this tacked on first, get all the lower pieces, then I'll remove the top piece, and I can weld it inside on these braces, get all that welded up, and then put the top back on, get it final welded, and then this thing's done. So I've gone ahead and welded up everything down inside here that I wouldn't be able to get to with the top on. It's probably a little overkill for what we're doing here, but I figure it certainly can't hurt. I've also gone ahead and got some welding onto the casting itself, along with some inside here for nothing else, a little extra security. Welding to the casting is not the best thing in the world, but I figure it's better than nothing. So now I'm going to go ahead and shoot some black paint down inside here just to try and keep that all from rusting up once I get the top piece on. And I know most of that's probably going to burn off, but it'll at least make me feel better about it anyway. Alright, so we'll slide this top cap into place. Line up the slots. Just needs a little clamp to get it where I need it to be. Looking pretty good. Another advantage of these slot and tab setups is now I can just weld through these slots, get everything tacked in place that way, and that cap isn't going anywhere. Once you get that all lined up, it pretty much only has one spot that it can go, so it works out pretty nice. Went ahead and finished welding this thing up. It all came out pretty good. I'd say I'm pretty happy with the way this whole project has turned out. This thing I think is going to work really well for what I intend to do with it. Now we're just moving on to brakes and steering, which of course I'm going to be doing differently than everybody else does it, because otherwise it'd be easy. So I'm going to do it the hard way. And the first step in getting the steering done is going to be to machine the top of this knuckle off flat, so I've got some place to bolt steering arm to. The idea that I'm looking at here is we'll have steering arm bolted here, then we're going to go down to the original tie rod hole, and tie rod's going to mount in between and double shear, so it should be super strong and shouldn't want to come off at any point. So this fixture that I've got is one that I've had for years. I've used it for doing Dana 44 flat top knuckles, modified it a little bit with a couple bolts up here for the unit bearing bolts to mount onto, and then it's clamped through the middle as well, so it should be good and secure. So we're going to go ahead and start machining this thing off and see what we get. Now that I've got a nice flat surface on here, I need to figure out what I'm going to do for a steering arm so that I can get a bolt pattern drilled and tapped into this top surface. So a couple of options I've came up with. First one, this is a blank that I had for some Dana 44 steering arms that I used to make, that I figured I could pretty much come up with whatever bolt pattern I wanted to with that, but it just wasn't working out the way I wanted it to. So I had some of these, see if this might work out a little better. It's a pre-made Dana 44 arm that it was close to doing what I wanted to do, but wasn't quite there. So instead, what we're going to do is go to plan C, which is just a blank chunk of metal. So I'm going to basically come up with a pattern that I want to get drilled and tapped into here that I can then put into this arm, get the hole out here for tie rods, and come up with something that's going to work exactly the way I want it to. So after some staring at this thing for a while and figuring out what I want to do and what's going to fit, I've come up with a 4-bolt pattern that I'm going to drill and tap to 9/16 to be able to use some Dana 44 studs. I'm going to go ahead and do this with the Dana 44 studs, cone washers, all that, so it'll be a good secure fit. I've come up with a pattern based off of the ball joint hole, so I can use that to reference off of, come over, drill these, and be able to have a pattern that I can repeat on the other side and into the steering arms pretty easily. Alright, now that we got the knuckles drilled and tapped, it's time to start building the steering arms. For that, we're going to be using this 1x2 steel bar stock. The first step in this process is we're going to be drilling holes and tapering them. We're going to be putting in these tapered cone washers, help lock everything in place. And to make the tapered hole, I've got a 1-inch drill bit that I've cut the appropriate taper on. So I should be able to drill out and then taper the 4 holes for these, and then move on to the next step. I got the 4 mounting bolts drilled and tapered, so while it's in this same setup, I'm going to go ahead and drill the hole out here for the tie rod, since the location of that is critical to match up with these mounting bolts, since that all ties into the knuckle with the way the hole's drilled in the knuckle. So if I don't reference it off of where these holes are, there's no way this hole lines up with the hole in the original steering arm and the knuckle. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And also, since this is the passenger side arm, in addition to the tie rod hole, there's also going to be a hole here for the drag link. So that's going to get drilled and tapered for a 1-ton tie rod end. So we've got the tapered reamer here for that. So we'll go ahead and get that done while we're right here as well. We got all the holes drilled, tapered, ready to go. So now it's just a matter of milling out a little bit here so it clears the inner knuckle, and it's going to wind up getting tapered radius on the end here just to kind of clean it up and make it look nice, and it'll be a steering arm. We got both arms all drilled. I haven't done the shape on the end of it yet because I don't really know that this is going to work exactly the way I intend to, so I'm going to wait until I know it works before I do that. But I've got the shape cut on the end so that it'll actually fit on the knuckles. Speaking of the knuckles, I got one of them mounted up here. Went ahead and used these Dynatrac ball joints. They seem like they're a pretty good deal. They're instead of being a metal ball in plastic, there's actually a uniball in here. So you've got metal ball, metal cage with I believe it's a Teflon liner or Kevlar, one of those. Anyway, also got a set of Dana 44 studs installed into these knuckles, so we can go ahead and get this bolted up on there. Again, it'll use the cone washers and nuts from the Dana 44. So we'll go ahead and get those put on real quick. Alright, so I just got this bolted down real quick. These are just some old lug nuts I had laying around, so I'm not using the lock nuts that are eventually going to be on there. It's just a little easier to get those on and off. And I also kind of mocked up how my steering's going to attach here. See, we've got the heim joint here. So it's 3/4 inch bolt that'll go all the way through, and then this just a 1-inch 120 wall tube spacer that'll go up in here, so it makes a nice double shear setup. Should be plenty strong for anything I'm going to do to it. I just like this setup a lot better than some of the weld-on setups that I've seen. That just doesn't seem like a good idea to me, welding to the casting and expecting that to hold up what you want. This also maintains the factory Ackerman angle and everything too, so it should drive pretty decent. Alright, so I've got both knuckles installed, got steering arms on, got the heim joints mocked up where they're going to be. So now it's time to see about setting up for our ram. So to start with that, basically measured from the table up to the center of the heim joint, measured from the table to the center of the ram, subtracted that from the measurement to the heim joint, and now I know the bottom of the mounting surface of the ram needs to be at 7 3/8 inches. So I made myself a line here on the tube. So now I'm going to build a plate that'll weld onto here that the ram will sit on, and that'll be the beginnings of our ram mount. So now I've got this plate tacked on here. Kind of gives me the height that the ram's going to sit at, the angle it's going to be at, and then I've got it positioned front to back and side to side on there where it needs to go. So we got the center line of the axle lined up with the center line of the ram, so it's sitting right in the middle. Then the next step I'm going to do is right here, cut this plate off, and then here I'm going to cut it just enough that I can take this little 2-inch lip and bend it up here, weld it back up, and give me some pretty good strength through there, and also help protect the ram from anything coming into it. And then we'll wind up, it'll get gusseted off the top of the truss, probably all the way out to this front lip here, and it's also get gusseted underneath, and may even end up with a full skid plate underneath yet too. So not quite sure how that's all going to work out yet, but we're working on it. I also swapped out the diff cover. It had the standard profile cover on it, which was making it so this ram had to be further out than I wanted it to be. So I swapped to this low profile cover they're specific for the Super Duty front end, and gives me a lot more room to be able to move the ram back where I want it to be. You can see it's still pretty tight in there, but it clears So should work out pretty well. Okay, so I got the ram mount complete. See, it's got the ram all bolted on there. Everything's welded up. Looks like it should do the job. I also added on a tube here, kind of gives it a little bit more lateral stability, as well as protecting the ram from any rocks that might jump up there and bite it. And another one that's going to go on here and attach to the diff cover. I'm just waiting for a tube connector to go right here so the whole thing can unbolt. All right, so I got my tie rods done. So the PSC kit came with these tubes for the tie rods. Unfortunately, they're about an inch too short for what I need, and they're also the inserts for the heim joints did not fit real well in there. There's about 40 thousandths clearance in it, so fortunately I had some pieces of 1.5 inch 250 wall tube from other projects, so I was able to use those. I also got this other guard on here, so it's got a removable tube connector there, so it's welded to the diff cover here, so it'll just unbolt there when I got to pull the diff cover off. So it should help protect that ram from any rocks coming in this way. And that's pretty much it for this thing, apart from link mounts and a few little details that I'm going to have to get done once I do finally go to install it. This thing is done and ready to start working on putting in.